Thank you very much, Anya, and thank you for the invitation. Delighted to be here. And thank you all for I'm sure many have made long journeys to get here. I suppose what I want to do is give an overview of the office that we work in, that I work in, and that is involved with promotion and protection of children's rights throughout Ireland, and also maybe take a look more specifically at some of the complaints that are involved in relation to children with special needs and special education needs. Some of the examples I've given will be in relation to second level, but they are relevant to primary school as well. And I also want to take a look at another aspect, which is sort of just making sure that we hear the voice of the child, so that we know exactly what the needs are as clearly as possible. So that's sort of 3 sections I'll be running through. Delighted to be here, and as Anya said, I keep saying I'm 18 months in the job, but I'm sneaking up close to 2 years, so I'm going to have to start getting the handle of that, and I keep feeling like there was a comfort blanket in saying I'm only 18 months in the job. But I thought, usually what I do in these things is just go straight into the outline of the office, but I thought in a case like this, I think it's important. Somebody once told me that people don't care what you know unless they know that you care, and I think one of the things that helps with that is to sort of give a background. So I want to give a personal background in mind. My situation up to now, if I can get there we are. I'm a Donegal man, born and bred, and despite what my wife says that I'm living here longer than I'm living there, it doesn't matter. I'm still a Donegal man, born and bred. Big into sports all my life, with football or basketballs, golf, anything at all. I loved playing sport, and it was a real asset to me. Not that I was good at it, but just that it meant that I was able to link in with communities all over the world. Everywhere I went, I joined a GAA club, whether it was Boston, New York, Manchester, London, Dublin, wherever. And it made a huge difference in the way I sort of interacted with people and the communities I could learn from. And as we all know, the Irish are great at networking. Nobody ever uses the word networking, but they just say, we joined a club, or I know somebody, or where are you from? And all of a sudden you have a huge level of connections, and I think it's a fantastic thing to have. And for me, it was through sport. I was not great academically originally. I was a bit of a messer in school, but I managed to scrape myself into a job in the old days in what the bank was considered a good job. And I say the old days, I won't tell you my age, but my daughter recently sent me a birthday card saying, welcome to the winter of your 40s. So I'm in that sort of range. But I spent 5 years working at the bank, and I realised that I loved working with people, but I hated the job. So it sort of helped me to clarify what I wanted to do, and I ended up getting a bit of guidance then from a career guidance person, and they suggested I go on to college. So at the age of about 23, 24, I went to university in London because, and again, these are all things that sort of link in with the work I'm doing now, because when I was a messer, I hadn't taken French, so I had no second language, so I couldn't get into university in Ireland. So I had to look further abroad, and thankfully the EU paid for it. In those days you could go abroad in the EU, because you're an EU citizen, they paid for it. So that were all these things that sort of rolled back, and now 25 years later I'm seeing students losing that opportunity because of Brexit. So it's an interesting thing. So I got a degree in psychology there, came back to Ireland, got a master's and a PhD eventually over time, spent 7 years working full time and doing the PhD. But I worked in psychology, both in intellectual disability and sexual abuse. I worked with offenders, I worked with victims, and I moved to spend 5 years working with Carrie based in Dublin, but having offices in Limerick and Cork, where we worked with children and families who were affected by abuse. I then moved into the Ombudsman's office and worked as director for 2 years before I was very, very lucky to be selected as the Ombudsman for Children to replace Emily Logan. My sense of myself, and I'm not sure if this is accurate, but this is the way I like to see myself, is that I work with people without judgment. And as you can see with the range of people I have worked with, the biggest one is working with sexual offenders. If I can work with them without judgment, it makes a huge difference to the way I work in general. And same with intellectual disability. So the challenging behaviours and things like that never bothered me. It was never personalised. And working with children and families was the same. Sports people are the same. I work essentially with everybody in the same light. That's the sense of how I try to do my job. The job description, I was very lucky, and again this fits in with listening to the voices of children. When Emily Logan decided to step down, the Department of Children immediately set about finding 30-odd children from around the country from 7 years of age to 17 to design the job description, to design the job advertisement, to help with the selection of the candidates, and to do the interviews at the end. So they were involved in the final 5 interviews. And it was the scariest interview I've ever had in my life. There's not one of you here who doesn't know what I'm talking about. Don't children ask it like it is, and they tell it like it is. So, and then all we were told was, because we were also being interviewed by adults as well, but we were told, prepare for a role play with children. And that could have meant, do I go in with jeans and a t-shirt, do I go in with jeans and a shorts, what do I do? Anyway, it was the toughest 40 minutes of an interview. There was 12, I think, children at that stage for that interview. But I was delighted to get to the top 5, and I was happy to just give it a go. So when I came out the other end, I was really, really chuffed. They designed the job description, so they got a brainstorm. They put up on a huge big board, 2 huge big boards, one for the younger people and one for the older one. And some of the words they have for the job description, none of it involved what degree you had or what experience you had. They were looking for people. They wanted someone who could listen, someone who could have a cup of tea with. And again, when you think about that sort of linking with communities, that's a crucial part of it. Having fun with, but also somebody who was brave, and that's the bit that scares me at times, and someone who would fight for me. Because I have to keep reminding myself and reminding my staff and reminding our office that we're going to challenge government ministers here, we're going to challenge policies, we're going to challenge Secretary Generals, but we have to be brave because that's what the children need from us. So they were very clear, and I think that both those boards, Anya's been in our office, both those boards are hanging in the office. One is in the main foyer and one is in my office. So when I get stuck on a case and I'm not sure what to do, where to go, I take a look up at that, and it reminds me, this is what the young people want from me. They don't always need me to be civil. They don't always need me to be diplomatic. Sometimes they need me to be brave and strong in these things. And it's a great reminder, and I think it's why I always try to go back to the young people as much as possible to hear what they need, because they tell it like it is, and they don't ask for too much. They never ask for too much. They always ask for just what they need. So that's a little bit about me. I'll move on to the office now. We were set up under the Act. There was an Act created in 2002 as a result of a lot of pressure from the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, and also a lot of civil organisations like ISPCC, Bernardo's, and people like that felt there was a need for an ombudsman for children. 2004, the office actually started operating with Emily Logan in place. We're an independent statutory body, and I'm appointed by the President. So I have a 6-year term from February 15 to February 21, is that right? My mathematics right? Yeah. And the idea of the independence is I'm directly accountable to the Oireachtas, so I don't have a government minister overseeing me. I don't have a department that I have to report to. When I present my annual reports, it goes to all members of the Oireachtas, including the Senate. And when I report to the Oireachtas, I report to committees. So last year, you've all seen what it's like to be in an Oireachtas committee. I went to 3 different Oireachtas committees. The Committee for Youth and Children, they keep changing the name, Health and Children was last time, Education, and Public Services and Oversight Petitions Committee. So it gives a great scrutiny, but what that allows is that's all the parties involved. They can all ask questions, they can all make sure that I'm doing the job I'm supposed to be doing, as opposed to one government minister who may have a political agenda checking out on me. The only connection I have with the ministry is through the Department of Children. They send down the budget. That's just a mechanism. We'd like to even make that more independent so that it comes through a committee, but we're working on that. And that's crucial because, as one minister, Minister Harris, said publicly, my job is to be a thorn in their side so that children's rights are protected at every time. And even when they improve, I congratulate them and say, right, there's more we can do from there. The key functions that we have, one is complaint handling, which a lot of people will probably know about. We're essentially set up to be an alternative to High Court, to court actions. We're a free, independent and impartial service. And that can be difficult sometimes for parents or advocates who come forward to us, because the legislation says that I have to be neither an advocate for the child nor an adversary to the public body when I take a complaint. So I'm always looking to walk that line of fairness when I get a complaint. However, if I get as far as a complaint and I've found in favour of against the public body, then I will be a very strong advocate for the recommendations to be followed through on, and I will push them as hard as I can. We are the alternative dispute resolution. So we work on the principle that everything has gone through the local procedures first. We are the last case. In the same way as you wouldn't go to court until you've exhausted all the other procedures, we should be the last port of call. However, we often get calls from people early on and say, what do I do now? We say, well, listen, you need to write to the board of management or whoever it is. You've missed a step before you can come to us. But we're quite happy to do that, and I think that's an important piece. So complaint handling, we got over 1,600 complaints last year, and it looks like we're going to have another record year this year. We've over 12,000 complaints handled since we started, and it gives us a huge insight. The other part of our work is to promote children's rights and welfare. So we do that in a range of ways. One is we provide advice to government on law affecting children. So if you think of it, the way I try to explain this is like a triangle, a triumvirate. We have the complaints that come in, and that informs me as to what issues are out there for children and young people and for families. That information then allows me to give proper advice to government on the legislation, and allows us to make sure that those flaws that we've identified through the complaint system no longer are built into the system. We can change things through legislation, through policies and procedures, and we can give that advice. And we've given advice to almost every government minister at this stage in relation to legislation and policy. We're also encouraging the development of better public administration, so that means we work with civil servants and public servants, and we're doing a big piece of work on that next year in relation to how to get them to see the impact of their decisions on children on the ground. And we've seen that on numerous occasions, and I've said it clearly that the Department of Education is usually the worst offender in that regard, because there's a lot of them make decisions that don't realise where it impacts and how it impacts. But we're working with that, and we're trying to do a big piece of work in regard to that in relation to the UCC are helping us with that. We also raise awareness with children and adults alike, but we bring in over 1,000 children have come through our offices nearly every year. We invite them in, whether it's school kids from different schools, from third class through to transition year, are invited up to do a workshop with us for maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours. And they learn about their rights. They understand how their rights are impacting themselves and where they get their rights. So, I mean, very simple question we ask them. If they have a room to themselves, that gives them privacy, it gives them safety, it gives them security, it gives them the right to their family. Those sorts of things. If they get breakfast, if they get clothes, they realise they all of a sudden have a whole series of rights before they even leave the house. And if they're leaving the house to go to school, then they realise they've got a right to education, and they've got the right to the best education. So those things, it starts to open up their minds, and it's a very, very important piece. And from my point of view, it's a huge piece that I want to build on. A lot of our work in the last 10 years has been around complaints, but I want to build on that awareness raising, because those children 10 years from now are going to be the adults protecting the rights of their own children in the future, or protecting the rights of other children and being public servants or nurses or doctors, whatever it might be. So I think we need to build that continuous understanding of children's rights and the importance of it. And then we consult directly and highlight the concerns of children. So I'll show you a few examples of where we've done that. Make sure I keep it on that. So part of what I did, the first year I sort of tried to just get the hang of the office and understand it. This year I worked very hard, and the team worked very hard in building a new strategy. We did that, and we created a vision which we believe we're going to try and work towards over the next couple of years, is to see an Ireland where all children and young people are actively heard and respected, so that they experience safe, fulfilling and happy everyday lives. And we specifically put in everyday lives so that they're, as much as possible, their lives are as happy and fulfilling. It's not all the time, but as much as possible. And we want to use our independence and our powers to the fullest extent to bring this about. And that's our nod to that word brave. We have to use it to the fullest of our extent, and we have to ask ourselves every time, have we done anything, or have we left any step out that we could push for children's rights better? Our values that we're going to try and work off, and this is hopefully again what I'm going to try and do on a personal basis, but what our whole team will do, is we need to be compassionate, we need to be independent, and that's the crucial part I spoke about earlier on. We want to be accessible to everybody as much as possible. We want to have an authoritative approach so that ministers, government, policies, politicians, Secretary Generals will take heed of what we have to say. We want to be innovative and transparent. And again, the innovation takes risks. There's things that our legislation says we can do and can't do, and I have to take a look at that and say, how can I work with that? Is there things we can do differently? Is there things we can work with to make things better? And that's a crucial part of evolving. We've set up our office, we've created, Emily's done a fantastic job of creating credibility for our office. It's my job to drive that forward and increase that, but also do new things as well. And transparency is also a crucial part. And again, most of the work that I do will be FOIable, so we have to make sure that anything we do is done in an ethical and appropriate manner. 3 main objectives in that regard from the strategy. One is to increase the awareness of children and young people's rights and the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child and the role of our office. But more importantly, the rights of the children. The role of our office is just a byproduct, and I'll show you how I'm going to do that in a second. We're also working, and this is the piece that I was talking about, the public servants are a crucial part, because there's a lot of fantastic public servants doing fantastic work out there, and they need to be supported, and we want to work to build their capacity to develop and implement a child rights based approach within their practice. So from my point of view, and I've seen it in many departments, there's lots of people who can see the issues where systems aren't working for children, and they want to make a different decision, but they're blocked, they're afraid, they're scared in case that creates a precedent. They're going to do all sorts of things that just their boss won't let them do. And I think that's where we need to get past. We need to create that opportunity for public servants to be supported to take that individual choice. And again, your children are very clear examples of the system, that they're the 10% where the system isn't working. I always say the system works for 90%, and we need a more flexible position in regards to the other 10%. But we need to support our civil servants and public servants to make those decisions so that they can say, I looked at this, and in the best interest of this individual child, I made this decision. And that allows them to say, well, that doesn't relate to the next 25 children that are exactly like this. So it gives them that permission to do that, and at the same time not create a precedent. Because I think that's the nightmare scenario, and the one that's always put up to me is the Senate case, which was a huge fight through the High Courts and European Court, and appropriately ended up with better education for children with autism. But it cost 500 million. And all you think, every civil servant has that in the back of their head, am I the person who's going to cost 500 million? And that's not the way they should be thinking. They should be thinking, I need to create a situation where this child here can improve their situation. So we can try and help them with that. And we also want to influence positive change for children and young people in Ireland. And we've specifically honed in on 3 cohorts, because there's 1.2 million children in Ireland, and they're all within our remit. We wanted to see where we can make a difference in each of those 3 cohorts. We picked out children with mental health issues, children with disability, and children in homeless situations. So between now and the end of 2018, we're going to try and make a big impact on those. We're going to keep working on the others, but where the resources allow us and where the focus will be is those 3 cohorts. Okay, so just to give a few examples. Okay. Okay. We're a child in preschool free year. So in the early stages of the new preschool free year, we got a complaint from a parent whose child was sort of mildly disabled and had found difficulty getting support to go to the preschool year. As we know, there was no specific provider allowed for that sort of scenarios. SNAs in preschool situation was nobody had responsibility for that. No department took responsibility for this. This particular parent was lucky in that it was an area where the HSE felt that they could provide something, so they did provide an SNA whenever they could. But it meant that within that first year, the child was probably only there maybe 2 or 3 days of the week. And then a lot of the time, the parent was also paying for SNAs to try and provide support to bring the child to there. But between the exams or tests and all sorts of things, hospital appointments, they weren't there all the time. So we felt that this was thoroughly inappropriate. We got in touch with the Department of Children, as it was, and the Department of Health, and they agreed that because the child had missed some days, that they would allow them to come back the second year and take the equivalent of 5 days a week over 2 years, and that was okay. But we were very, very strong in our belief that somebody needed to take control of who was looking after the support, because you're going to provide free childcare in that situation for children, all children across the country. You also need to make it available to anybody who has difficulty for that. So we pushed very hard, and we realised, we went back and found there was a very strong report in 2011 written about this, which provided recommendations in that area. We pushed and we pushed and we pushed, and I think what eventually, from our point of view, broke our back was when we got a response like this, and this is real civil service speak. A draft final report was circulated, and a further revised draft final report is being prepared. I mean, this is in regards to a review of the 2011 report, which had all the recommendations you needed. So these guys were drafting final reports that were then revising, reviewed. So I just felt there was at least, if we waited another 6 months, we'd probably end up with 4 more words there. You could have a draft, brief, review, draft, final. So it was real. So we eventually had a to do with the various departments. Somewhere after that, James Riley announced this new AIMS thing. I think it coincided, and I think this is oftentimes the importance of keep pushing, because I think it coincided with European funding coming along and also in political necessity. But we ended up with this new model, access and inclusion model, which is starting this year, which provides a clearer understanding where the SNAs are coming from, or the special supports are coming from, and we'll make it accessible for as many children as possible across the service. And that's the sort of situation where, and this is a good example of us taking one case that helps to change the system, you know, because I think we put pressure on, parents were putting pressure on, different organisations were putting pressure on, money was coming in for certain situations, and that's the way it works. It comes together at the right time, but you have to make sure we keep putting the pressures on, and that's the thing that changes the system. Again, I haven't looked at it. It's too early to say whether this model is going to work either, but I know it's certainly a step forward for a lot of children and young people or children in that situation, because we all know, all the results show that the earlier a child gets support in education, the better for everybody. Looking at this one, and just listening under the second example is a second level situation, but again, it goes back to underage. A young child came in, unaccompanied minor, from outside of Europe, who'd suffered horrendous trauma. He'd seen the death of his family, he'd physically seen them, all sorts of trouble. Was a little bit troublesome, probably a lot troublesome in national school, and got expelled at one stage, went back to his homeland and then came back and ended up in a foster home in Ireland again, unaccompanied. But because of his previous expulsion, he wasn't able to get into any schools in secondary school. He applied for secondary school, 26 schools they applied for. His social worker and his education and welfare officer applied for these. Every single school had a reason and a rationale for not accepting the man, or the young person, which was appropriate. And the Department of Education, when we asked them, they said, well, we can't interfere with the schools because it's nothing to do with us. But yet we did provide our 9 hours of home tuition a week, which is what we're supposed to do. So both parties, in theory, and he was in home tuition for 2 years. Instead of being in 28 hours a week in school, learning and meeting people, he was in home tuition for 9 hours a week. We could easily have just sat down and said, right, that's it. Nobody has broken the rules that we are allowed to test, but we felt there was a moral situation here where somebody needed to take responsibility for this child's education, and we pushed it with the Department of Education. Eventually they came up with the scenario which is now in the education admissions bills, which would, fingers crossed, will cross the threshold into law very, very soon, but they came up with the situation where an education welfare officer can now designate a school for that child, for a child like that, a child who's outside this education. They can go and say, you have to take this child. But they also, and this is the great piece from this conference, they also said the same about CNOs. The CNO can now designate a school where they feel that the child is out of education inappropriately. And that was something that was always difficult before. Now, I'll put a caveat that we've also asked the Department of Education, if you take a look at this example, 26 schools, will they designate it after 3 schools have said no? Will they designate it after 5 schools have said no? I'm not quite sure what the criteria is going to be. And the same with the special needs. I'm not quite sure what the criteria will be as to when they can designate. And I also want to make sure that their designation of a school doesn't mean that some other child is bumped out, because usually a school will say no because we're full up. So I say, okay, well, if you're going to designate a school to take a child, you have to follow the resources and give them the resources, whether that means they get an extra staff or whatever the funding is for that. So it's making sure that there's no knock on the things that we can foresee. You know, there probably will be other issues, but those are the things. But again, it's a huge step forward if we know that the person, like in this case, the 26 schools, the social worker and the education worker, they worked their butt off trying to get this child in. And eventually, like Irish systems, eventually somebody to something, a CEO somewhere heard about it and said, right, okay, I'll look after it. But that's not the way to run a system, and it's 2 years too late. One of the other examples, the Department of Education also said, well, the other option for this young person is to go back to 6th class and take a feeder school in. The child would have been 15 going into first year. You know, why don't you just, you know, because again, that's the system. That's what I'm saying. They follow the system. They don't want it flexible in the system in case it starts an avalanche. And we're saying we need to support flexibility. This is simple there. This case is not going to happen again too often. This is somewhere where they could have been flexible and say, right, we can say, talk to the school and say, we'll give you the resources to take the school after 5 attempts. I don't know what the right number would be. But I suppose, again, it's an example of where the system is changed as a result of one case. And I think it's the power of one. I think that's something I want to put out there. So if you've got questions or concerns, we take investigations. We only take about 10 investigations a year, even out of 1,600 complaints, 5 to 10 investigations, because we look at to see what can make a difference to the whole system. You know, and sometimes, obviously, if there's individual cases that need to be pushed, we will. But obviously, if they can make a difference to the whole system, we'll take that as well. This is another one, again, at second level, but again, I thought it might be interesting just to highlight the idea that if we get enough complaints, this is the support for children with dyslexia, and various other disabilities. We got a range of complaints. We only got the remit. We changed our remits in 2013, so the State Exams Commission only came into our remit then. But from then, we were getting close to 50 to 60 complaints a year in relation to this concern, where families were coming in and saying, listen, my child was given a special support or a reasonable accommodation, which could have been a reader, or it could have been a private time, or separate various different supports to do their exam for junior cert. But when we went looking for it in Leaving Cert, it didn't happen. They said no to us. And yet they tell us, according to our policies and procedures, it's the same criteria. The difference was that the school recommended it at junior cert, and it was the National Education Psychology Service who recommended it in Leaving Cert. And we couldn't find, when we went back to investigate that, we just felt that this was wrong. It was unfair. The communications about it were wrong, and the oversight around it. So the appeal system wasn't appropriate either, and there was poor communication. So while we didn't take any of the cases to individual investigation, we looked at, with the power and the weight of the numbers that were there, we felt we had to engage with the State Exam Commission. And to be fair, the other Ombudsman, who had also got complaints from over 18s, we pushed together. And since then, just 2 weeks ago, I think the State Exam Commission have come out with a whole new system in which they're guaranteeing that if you get it at junior cert, you will get it at Leaving Cert. And that takes, we were meeting children and young people and parents who were absolutely devastated by this, because they were oftentimes they were only told 3 months beforehand that it wasn't going to happen. And these are the sort of things, again, where the tick boxing doesn't fit what the child needs. And you're not talking about huge numbers. They reckon this will probably increase the support that's needed by about 1,000. You know, not impossible, not a huge number to go by. There's usually about 16 to 18,000 children get support in this way across the 2 exams. So it's not going to make a huge difference from that point of view, but it'll make a huge difference to the peace of mind and the self-esteem. And again, to be credit to the Department of Education, we are getting a lot more children who previously would have dropped out of junior cert trying to do the Leaving Cert. And that's fantastic, you know, and I think that, so this will just encourage us a bit more. So again, what I'm highlighting here is the idea that even if we don't go to investigation, we can make an impact with the departments in that way. Other examples of complaints we've had, a child 4 years of age with serious disability and mobility issues in a wheelchair, looking for a motorised wheelchair, was refused because someone somewhere along the line had decided 7 years of age was the age you need to have a wheelchair. But she was in, I think she was in Enable at the time, and had passed all her exams. There's driving exams where I didn't know that, or instructions, whatever, but she was well able to do that. They said no without even visiting the house. They said no without visiting her and without ever meeting her. And she's a very bright girl. We got involved, asked them why they didn't. Someone said, some person, again, this is the civil servants, had the initiative to go off and figure out, I need to have a policy, and she did their best, and she went through the internet and found 7 years of age somewhere in America or somewhere, and created a policy. And then the policy was in place, so nobody could be flexible with that. So it was that sort of scenario. So those sort of things, we made a difference, got her in the mobility wheelchair, and it made a huge difference to her life as well. So just those sort of examples are there. I also want to talk about hearing the voice of the child. We've done that in numerous vulnerable groups. We've listened to children who come over here. This is back in the sort of 2008, 2009. There was a lot of young people who were unaccompanied, and at that stage they were kept in practically warehouses, maybe 30, 40 children in one place, where there was care staff up from between 9 and 5, and then essentially after that there was security guards. There was no real protection. So we listened to their voices, and that's subsequently changed as a result of that report. People have gone much more into foster care now. Views from the inside with St. Patrick's Institution, children who've been in prison, 16, 17-year-olds. Again, people who aren't being heard, very difficult to hear their voice, but we managed to listen to them, and again that led to the closure of St. Pat's for those young people. And we looked at children who were living on the streets, homeless, back in 2011. And interesting, if you read this now, and I read it, and I'm going to have to take a look at what we do for it, very important insight to the young people of that stage, but a whole different cohort to what's there now. You know, this is totally different. These were young people who'd been in care and had fallen out. They were probably 17, 18 years of age, but there's a whole new, the shame of our country now is that probably on Christmas Day we have 2,500 children living in homeless situations, either in hotels or emergency accommodation. So that we looked at this back in 2011. I think there was 150 children across the country in that situation. So it's a huge indictment of our country, and we need to work on that. So that's something I will be looking at again. Other areas, we've heard the voice of the child. We did a bullying exercise, a bullying consultation with children, so that over 300 or 400, I think 400 children come into our office, and every time they come in each class, we asked them, what would you do about bullying? What do you think of the issues? And they were very clear in their answers that they wanted it to stop early, wanted people to be told about it, we wanted to find people who they could share it with, but they also wanted to work with the children who were bullies. These were young people saying, you know what, I have to meet him on the street outside, I have to meet them somewhere else. There's no point in just expelling them. I need you to work with them and help them to be different so that they can stop bullying everybody. And that was hugely important. And for me, that was a real eye-opener. That they were talking about, adults would call restorative justice. They were talking about relationships and building them up and knowing that it was important. So we put that forward. That report was launched probably 6 months before the Department of Education's guidelines on bullying within schools, and probably 60% of that report is in those guidelines. So it meant that those voices were directly translated into action. The big debate was around the children's constitutional referendum. We realised that nobody had asked children about the referendum. We decided to pull 400 children together up to the Aviva Stadium. We just nominated 4 schools to be pro the referendum and 4 schools to debate against it. Joe Duffy was the compere, and then at the end we had a vote. And we were absolutely panicking, because at the end of the vote it went up, it was 53% carried, and we said, my God almighty, we would look so embarrassed if we'd actually lost that thing. We brought the children together and they weren't in favour of a children's constitutional referendum, but the debate was so good, and they only had about 2 weeks notice to do it. It was so good, but the important thing for me was that matched exactly what our society did 3 days later on the Saturday. It was 53% it was carried by. So our children have the finger on the pulse. They know what they're doing, they know what they're arguing about, they know what they want to say. And it was so much of a representative society. It was fantastic. Other people who listened to the voice of the child, the President and the Department of Children did a piece for 1916-2016. He says that there's a sense of wonder in the young people because nothing frightens them and they're not afraid to use their imagination. So if you listen to their voices, they also have a profound sense of ethics and positive value set. What they did was the Department of Children did a huge consultation in relation to what do you think is good about Ireland and what do you think is young people want. So the 8 to 12-year-olds said at that stage, they presented to the President, they wanted all the old empty houses fixed up to help the homeless people. They want to change obesity in Ireland, and there should be less computers and internet and more activity. We want to change smoking so that people won't die from it. And we want to stop poverty and homelessness by creating more jobs for people with no college education. That's 8 to 12-year-olds. You don't need a college education to know what people want. They know exactly, and they're saying exactly what is the truth. The 13 and 18-year-olds, again, this is stuff that was really sort of blew my mind at the sort of understanding what they wanted. They wanted to bring up the right to die. You know, again, they're talking about the things that we aren't talking about. They wanted to speak about that for young people as well. They wanted sex education to be consistent and not changed by school philosophies. They wanted to talk about same-sex marriage. They wanted easy access to mental health services without the needs for parents' consent. You know, again, I would often have said we want the easy access to mental health. The parents' consent is a piece that they want, so that's crucial that we have to do that. And we don't have the right to vote, but we do need the right to be heard. So again, it's that aspect of, at 16 years of age, you can work, you can have a tax, you can pay taxes, you can do all sorts of bits and pieces, but you can't vote for how you change your country. So let's find a way to hear their voices so at least the people who can vote are making an impact. So we did that piece on education. Just want to give you some of the impact on that, or the voice that came through in that. They want education to be about discovery, find out more about themselves, you know, discover your own talents and skills. Instead of it being forced upon you that you have to do this or that and the other, it just gets very stressful, and you don't really need to find out. You don't really get to find out much about yourself through education. So it's an important thing to listen to, and we need to push that forward. More group work, and again, this is a very, very smart, very simple thing to build our confidence in talking to new people or to speaking out. We ask so much and we assume so much. When you go into university from a small school or a big school, if you haven't been working in groups, you haven't learned how to get your confidence up in speaking, it can be very isolating then to move to a new school, a new university. And it should be more about real life situations. For example, helping or caring for a relative if they're sick or needing in Ireland. There's an estimation that approximately 40,000 young people are helping as carers in Ireland. You know, so that's real, and education doesn't take account for that. And a lot of them won't identify as carers because they're just helping in the family, and that's the way it should be. I think it's just something that it's the children are saying it very, very clearly. And this is, for me, this would be my target. If I was in charge of education, every child should leave with self-confidence. You can do anything with your self-confidence. It doesn't matter what your academic piece is. I think that you would get that if school focus a bit less on academic work and a bit more on personal growth. So it's not about getting rid of the education as we know it. It's about maybe polishing what we have and bringing about a better education system that allows our young people to grow in a more holistic way. And I think we're moving in that direction. There's a lot of talk about well-being and health in schools. And I think the young people who will come through 5 years from now will be more rounded. I've seen it consistently that there's children much more emotionally connected with better emotional vocabulary, talking about love and hate, and more nuanced. And one of the greatest things I love is coming out of my child's national school and walking past a stream of children who say, "I love you, Daddy," or "I love you, Mommy." My dad never, I think he said it once in his lifetime, but it might have been by accident. But it just, that's a generation. I think we're moving in that direction. I think it's fantastic. There's a better open display of emotions. There's a better vocabulary coming through. So we will see a change, but we have to keep working on it. We have to be resilient, but we have to listen to the young people. So finally, this is a piece that I'm doing at the moment. As a result of our strategic plan, I want to listen to our young people and find out how am I going to raise awareness in my office. Because if I was to design a communication process now, it would be ads on TV, ads on radio, and maybe something up on my website. And I would miss every single child in the country. I'm going around, we were hoping to meet about 10,000 children. I was been working with children from LGBT, undocumented children, children in trouble with the law. And we're finding that most of them find their information on the internet, YouTube, and they're telling us not to put up ads that they can block. All these simple things, which radio stations, things like Spin, iRadio, not the radios that I would listen to. Posters, they want posters in things like barbers and hairdressers, because that's where they hang out and they love it, or shopping centres. And again, it's listening to the voice so that we can maximise the impact of all the work we do, whether that's in relation to education or health or just passing on the information that we want to get. So that's a lot about me, and I just want to finalise this piece, and this is about you. I think Eleanor Roosevelt was asked, where do the human rights begin? And she says, it's in the small places close to home. So close and so small that they cannot be seen on any map of the world, yet they are the world of that individual person. The neighbourhood he lives in, the school or college he attends, the factory, farm or office where he works. And unless the rights have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere. And that's what I try to do. I try to, every time that our staff are working on a complaint or an issue, what's it about for this young person? Keep the name of the young person in place. And you guys are working to bring those rights right back into home. And anything I can do to help, I'll be delighted. Thank you.